Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. We are reading Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, the first novel that really put Trollope on the map. And we are finishing up today a series of chapters all about one event, a party at Ullathorne that Mr. and Miss Thorne throw for all the people of Barchester, for all the people of their estate, and all of our main characters come together. And much is said, and much is regretted, and much happens. And we are finishing up here, this next chapter. This is chapter 42. And this chapter underscores that the series of chapters, Trollope calls them Ullathorne Sports, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. But really, he could have called them The Trial of Eleanor Bold. A very attractive widow in Barchester who, unbeknownst to her, is being pursued by a couple of different suitors and not being pursued by the one that she wants. There's the odious Mr. Slope, who is the bishop's chaplain, but who thinks that he's going to become dean of Barchester. Now, we saw in an earlier chapter that he got her alone out on the wooded grounds of Ullathorne Court and pledged his love to her, called her by her first name, grabbed her by the waist, and she slugged him. And we know that there are two other aspirants for her hand, one who knows that he is and one who doesn't. And the one who knows that he is Bertie Stanhope, the wastrel son of a prebendary in the Barchester liturgical bureaucracy. And Bertie Stanhope is largely being manipulated by his sister Charlotte. He himself is useless. He's a useless blot, and his father knows that. And his father has no money to give him anyway when his father is gone. So Bertie has to get money somehow, and he's proven in a number of different occupations that he can't earn it by living, by his own skill or industry. He won't do it. He's just an anemone. Which means he has to marry money. He has to marry for money. And his family, his sister Charlotte and his sister Madeline, come up with the idea that he should marry Eleanor Bold. And Charlotte's plan is long and logical and merciless. It's that we will grow you in her affections. We will invite you over to our house many times for chess or literary games or whatnot, until she becomes so fond of you that the step to matrimony will be easier. Now, we know what they don't know. We know what Trollope has told us, which is that she is absolutely not going to marry Bertie Stanhope. And we should have known, we should know that even without Trollope, that she just doesn't think of him that way. She's already had one illusion shattered. She came to violent opposition with her friends and family over their suspicion that Mr. Slope wanted to marry her. She thought nothing of the kind is true. Nothing of the kind can be construed. It's an insult to me that you would think that. Again, sorry for the dog noises in the background. She is choking, she is digging, she is thrashing around because I am not next to her. When I am next to her, she ignores me, but I need to be next to her. I told her. I don't know if that's coming out on camera. I don't know if the microphone is picking that up. I told her when I was coming in here to make this video, I said, I'm going in to make a video. You don't have to come with me. You're perfectly comfortable on the fainting couch. And it was, no, I insist on coming with you. Why aren't you holding me? Anyway, where was I for the dog digression? Oh, right. The third person who aspires to the hand of Eleanor Bold in marriage, although he does not know it, is Mr. Arabin, another member of the sprawling Barchester church community. They're all at the party. Mr. Slope got slugged and then took off because he learned the vital piece of news that the Dean of Barchester has finally died. He had a massive stroke and he has been hovering in between life and death. He has been Schrodinger's Dean, and now he is dead. So the place is open. Again, Trollope has told us that Mr. Slope is not even on the list of candidates. He is not going to get that job, no matter what he thinks at the moment. But that still leaves Eleanor at Ullathorne Court, miserable, because she's been accosted by Mr. Slope. Once she composes herself, at least partially, she seeks the solace, the consolation of Charlotte Stanhope. We, as the reader, know that's the last place she should go for consolation. But she doesn't know that. She's about to learn. It breaks your heart. I don't think she's one of Trollope's standout female characters, but it breaks your heart. So It's a nice long chapter too, so buckle in. Let's see here. So this is Ullathorne Sports Act 3. And now Miss Thorne's guests were beginning to take their departure, and the amusement of those who remained was becoming slack. It was getting dark, and the ladies in mourning costumes were thinking that if they were to appear by candlelight, they ought to readjust themselves. Some young gentlemen had been heard to talk so loud that prudent mammas determined to retire judiciously, and the more discreet of the male sex, whose libations had been moderate, felt that there was not much more left for them to do. Talking louder, meaning they're drunk. Morning parties, as a rule, are failures. I mean, I'm sure your parties were all great successes, Tony. People never know how to get away from them gracefully. A picnic on an island or a mountain or in a wood may perhaps be permitted. There is no master of the mountain bound by courtesy to bid you stay while in his heart he is longing for your departure. But in a private house or private grounds, a morning party is a bore. One is called on to eat and drink at unnatural hours. One is obliged to give up the day, which is useful, and is then left without resource for the evening, which is useless. One gets home exhausted, and yet at an hour too early for bed. There are no comfortable resources left. All this began now to be felt. Some young people had come with some amount of hope that they might get up a dance in the evening, and were unwilling to leave till all such hope was at an end. Others, fearful of staying longer than was expected, had ordered their carriages early and were doing their best to go, solicitous for their servants and their horses. The Countess and her noble brood, who are the number one get for the Ullathornes, for the Thornes, Mr. and Miss Thorne, or the ultimate get is for the local gentry to arrive. Now, the Countess and her noble brood were among the first to leave, and as regarded the Honourable George, her son, it was certainly time that he did so, meaning he was drunk. Her ladyship was in a great fret and fume. Those horrid roads would, she was sure, be the death of her, if unhappily she were caught in them by a dark night. The lamps, she had assured, were good, but no lamp could withstand the jolting of the roads to East Barsetshire. The De Courcy property lay in the western division of the county. Mrs. Proudie, that's the bishop's wife, could not stay when the Countess was gone, so the bishop was searched for by the Reverends Mr. Gray and Green, and found in one corner of the tent, enjoying himself thoroughly. He obeyed, however, the behests of his lady, and without finishing the sentence in which he was promising Dr. Gwynne that his authority at Oxford should remain unimpaired, and the episcopal horses, turned their noses toward the palatial stables. Then the Grantleys went. Before they did so, Mr. Harding managed to whisper a word in his daughter's ear. Of course, he said, he would undeceive the Grantleys as to the foolish rumor about Mr. Slope, because Eleanor's already made it clear to her father that there was nothing to your suspicions at all. I never had any thought towards the man whatsoever. That was the heart of why she had to leave Archdeacon Grantley's house, why she has felt at odds with everyone. Her father now knows this, and is saying, well, of course, I'll tell them all that we've all been wrong about this. No, said Eleanor, pray do not. Pray wait till I see you. You will be home in a day or two, and then I will explain everything to you. I shall be home tomorrow. Oh, I'm so glad. You will come and dine with me, and then we shall be so comfortable. Mr. Harding promised. He did not know exactly what there was to be explained, or why Dr. Grantley's mind should not be disabused of the mistake into which he had fallen, but nevertheless he promised. He owed some reparation to his daughter, and he thought that he might best make it by obedience. Frida, cut it out. Oh my God, you're disrupting my performance. And thus the people were thinning off by degrees as Charlotte and Eleanor walked about in quest of Bertie. Their search might have been long had they not happened to hear his voice. He was comfortably ensconced in the ha-ha. That is, you've got your sprawling lawn rolling out, and then you have a divot, a reinforced divot, a shallow wall, or sometimes a deep wall, that has a little declivity, and then you move on to the rest of the lawn. It's mainly designed so that when you're looking out the windows at your vast, sprawling lawn, you don't see a wall. I think walls are picturesque, but I live in New England. So anyway, he was comfortably ensconced in the ha-ha, with his back to the sloping side, smoking a cigar and eagerly engaged in conversation with some youngster from the further side of the county, whom he had never met before, and who was also smoking under Bertie's pupilage, and listening with open ears to an account given by his companion of some of the pastimes of eastern clime. "Bertie, I am seeking you everywhere," said Charlotte. "Come up here at once." Bertie looked up out of the ha-ha and saw the two ladies before him. As there was nothing for him but to obey, he got up and threw away his cigar. From the first moment of his acquaintance with her, he had liked Eleanor Bold. Had he been left to his own devices, had she been penniless, and had it been quite out of the question that he should marry her, he would probably have fallen violently in love with her. But now he could not help regarding her somewhat as he did the marble workshops at Carrara, as he had done his easel and palette, as he had done the lawyers' chambers in London, in fact, as he invariably regarded everything by which it should be proposed for him to obtain the means of living. Eleanor Bold appeared before him no longer as a beautiful woman, but as a new profession called matrimony. And there's one thing he's allergic to. It's a profession. It was a profession, indeed, requiring but little labor, and one in which an income was insured him. But nevertheless, he had been, as it were, goaded onto it. His sister had talked to him of Eleanor just as she had talked of busts and portraits. Bertie did not dislike money, but he hated the very thought of earning it. He was now called away from his pleasant cigar to earn it by offering himself as a husband to Mrs. Bold. The work, indeed, was made easy enough, for in lieu of his having to seek the widow had apparently come to seek him. He made some sudden absurd excuse to his auditor, and then throwing away his cigar for the second time. You're proud of you love these things, Tony, but you've already dispensed with it. Climbed up out of the wall of the ha-ha and joined the ladies on the lawn. Come and give Mrs. Bold an arm, said Charlotte, while I set you on a piece of duty which, as a proud chevalier, as a gallant knight, you must immediately perform. Your personal danger will, I fear, be insignificant, as your antagonist is a clergyman. Bertie immediately gave his arm to Eleanor, walking between her and his sister. He had lived too long abroad to fall into the Englishman's habit of offering each an arm to two ladies at the same time, a habit, by the by, which foreigners regard as an approach to bigamy, or a sort of incipient Mormonism. Trollope, the observer of foreign habits. Never any sharper. Oh, wait, there was someone much sharper at observing foreign habits, and who was that? Oh, it was his own mother. The little history of Mr. Slope's misconduct was then told to Bertie by his sister, Eleanor's ears tingling the while, and well they might tingle. If it were necessary to speak of the outrage at all, why should it be spoken of to such a person as Mr. Stanhope, and while in her own hearing? She knew she was wrong, and was unhappy and dispirited, and yet she could think of no way to extricate herself, no way to set herself right. Go home with your father. He was right there. He was right there. Charlotte spared her as much as she possibly could, spoke of the whole thing as though Mr. Slope had taken a glass of wine too much, said that of course there would be nothing more about it, but that steps must be taken to exclude Mr. Slope from the carriage. The illusion here is that Mr. Slope was drunk and that might mitigate his behavior. Mrs. Bold knows perfectly well he was not. Mrs. Bold need be under no alarm about that, said Bertie, for Mr. Slope has gone this past hour. He told me that business made it necessary that he should start at once for Barchester. He is not so tipsy, at any rate, but that he knows his fault, said Charlotte. Well, my dear, that is one difficulty over. Now I'll leave you with your true knight and get Madeline off as quickly as I can. The carriage is here, I suppose, Bertie? It's been here for an hour. That's well. Goodbye, my dear. Of course you'll come to tea. I trust to you to bring her, Bertie, even by force, if necessary. And so saying, Charlotte ran off across the lawn, leaving her brother alone with the widow. There's no reason for this plan anymore. As Eleanor Bold is acutely aware, the plan was that she would pair up with Bertie so that she was absolutely guarded against going back to Barchester in a carriage with Mr. Slope, who's just put his arm around her waist. But Mr. Slope is gone. But anyway, I'll let Trollope tell the story. As Miss Stanhope went off, Eleanor bethought herself that as Mr. Slope had taken his departure, there no longer existed any necessity for separating Mr. Stanhope from his sister Madeline, who much needed his aid. It had been arranged that he should remain so as to preoccupy Mr. Slope's place in the carriage, and act as a sort of social policeman to effect the exclusion of that disagreeable gentleman. But Mr. Slope had effected his own exclusion, and there was no possible reason now why Bertie should not go with his sister. At least Eleanor saw none, and she said as much. Oh, Charlotte lets her have her own way, he said. She has arranged it, and there will be no end of confusion if we make another change. Charlotte always arranges everything in our house, and rules us like a despot. But the Signora, said Eleanor, that's Madeline Vesey Stanhope, that's Bertie's sister. Oh, the Signora can do very well without me. Indeed, she will have to do without me, he added, thinking rather of his studies in Carrara than of his Barchester Heimnails. He's not staying in Barchester no matter what, or he's not staying the way he is. This moment marks a change in Bertie Stanhope's life. We're told in the last chapter that his creditors are right at his ears. So if he doesn't establish some line of new credit, if he doesn't establish money, he's got to leave. He's got to go out of England. He's got to go back to Italy and live as a wastrel, or go somewhere else. It had been said that Bertie Stanhope was a man without principle. He certainly was so. He had no power of using active mental exertion to keep himself from doing evil. Evil had no ugliness in his eyes, virtue no beauty. He was void of any of these feelings which actuate men to do good. He got into debt with utter recklessness, thinking nothing as to whether the tradesmen should ever be paid, but he did not invent active schemes of deceit for the sake of extracting the goods of others. If a man gave him credit, that was the man's lookout. Bertie Stanhope troubled himself nothing further. In borrowing money, he did the same. He gave people references to his governor, that is, his father, and told him that the old chap had a good income and agreed to pay 60% for the accommodation. All this he did without a scruple of conscience. Then he never contrived active villainy. Okay. What you're describing is contriving active villainy. That's all right. This is not time for a Catholic lecture. In this affair of his marriage, it had been represented to him as a matter of duty, that he ought to put himself in the possession of Mrs. Bowles' hand and fortune, and at first he had so regarded it. About her he thought but little. It was a customary thing for men situated as he was to marry for money, and there was no reason why he should not do what others around him did. And so he consented. But now he began to see the matter in another light. He was setting himself down to catch this woman, as a cat sits to catch a mouse. He was to catch her and swallow her up, and her child, and her houses and land, in order that he might live on her instead of on his father. There was a cold, calculating, cautious cunning about this, quite at variance with Bertie's character. The prudence of the measure was quite as antagonistic to his feelings as the iniquity. And then, should he be successful, what would be the reward? Having satisfied his creditors with half of the widow's fortune, good Lord, he would ruin her. He would be allowed to sit down quietly at Barchester, keeping economical house with the remainder. His duty would be to rock the cradle of the little Mrs. Bowles' child, and his highest excitement a demure party at Plumstead Rectory, should it ultimately turn out that the Archdeacon would be sufficiently reconciled to receive him. There was very little in the program to allure such a man as Bertie Stanhope. Would not the Carrara workshop, or whatever worldly career fortune might have in store for him, would not almost anything be better than this? The lady herself was undoubtedly all that was desirable. But the most desirable lady becomes nauseous when she has to be taken as a pill. He was pledged to his sister, however, and let him quarrel with whom he would, it behooved him not to quarrel with her. If she were lost to him, all would be lost that he could ever hope to derive henceforth from the paternal roof-tree. His mother was apparently indifferent to his weal or woe, to his wants or his welfare. His father's brow got blacker and blacker from day to day as the old man looked at his hopeless son. And as for Madeline, poor Madeline, whom of all of them he liked the best, she had enough to do to shift for herself. No, come what might, he must cling to his sister and obey her behests, let them be ever so stern, or at the very least seem to obey them, which is the plan that opens up in his tiny little mind, is to seem to obey them. Could not some happy deceit bring him through in this matter, so that he might save the appearance with his sister and yet not betray the widow to her ruin? What if he made a confederate of Eleanor? Because in this spirit that Bertie Stanhope set about his wooing. It's not really very convincing wooing, as you're going to see. But you are not going to leave Barchester, said Eleanor. I do not know. I hardly know yet what I am going to do. But at any rate, certain I must do something. You mean about your profession? Yes, about my profession, if you can call it one. And is it not one? Were I a man, I know none I should prefer except maybe painting. And I believe the one is as much in your power as the other. Because he's tried his hand at sculpting and painting. Yes, just about equally so, said Bertie, with a little touch of inward satire directed at himself. He knew in his heart that he would never make a penny by either. I have often wondered, Mr. Stanhope, why you do not exert yourself more, said Eleanor, who felt a friendly fondness for the man with whom she was walking, but I know it is very impertinent of me to say so. Impertinent? Not so, but much too kind. It is much too kind in you to take any interest in so idle a scamp. But you are not a scamp, though you are perhaps idle, and I do not take an interest in you, and I do take an interest in you, a very great interest, she added, in a voice which almost made him resolve to change his mind. And when I call you idle, I know you are only so for the present moment. Why can't you settle steadily to work here in Barchester? And make busts of bishops and dean and chapter? Or perhaps if I achieve a great success, obtain a commission to put up an elaborate tombstone over the prebendary's widow, a dead lady with a Grecian nose, a bandeau, and an intricate lace veil, lying, of course, on a marble sofa, from among the legs of which Death will be creeping out and poking at his victim with a small toasting fork. Eleanor laughed, but she thought it was that if the surviving prebendary paid the bill, the object of the artist as a professional man would, in a great measure, be obtained. I don't know about the dean and chapter and prebendary's widow, said Eleanor. Of course you must take them as they come, but the fact of your having a great cathedral in which such ornaments are required could not but be in your favor. Yes, a cathedral town like Barchester is one of the only places in England where a marvel carver, a sculptor, could actually make a living. No real artist could descend to the ornamentation of a cathedral, said Bertie, who had his ideas of high ecstatic ambitions of art, as indeed all artists have who are not in the receipt of a good income. Buildings should be fitted to grace and sculpture, not the sculpture to the grace of the building. Yes, when the work of art is good enough to merit it. Do you, Mr. Stanhope, do something sufficiently excellent, and we ladies of Barchester will erect it for a fitting receptacle. What shall the subject be? I'll put you in your pony chair, Mrs. Bold, as Danica put Ariadne in her lion. Only you must promise to sit for me. My ponies are too tame. I fear that my broad-brimmed straw hat will not look so well in marble as the lace veil of the prebendary's widow. If you will not consent to that, Mrs. Bold, I will consent to try no other subject in Barchester. You are determined, then, to push your fortune in other lands? I am determined, said Bertie, slowly and significantly, as he tried to bring up his mind to a great resolve. I am determined that in this matter I shall be guided wholly by you. Wholly by me? Said Eleanor, astonished at and not quite liking his altered manner. Wholly by you, said Bertie, dropping his companion's arm and standing before her on the path. In their walk they have come exactly to the spot in which Eleanor had been provoked into slapping Mr. Slope's face. Could it be possible that this place was particularly unpropitious to her comfort? Could it be possible that she should here have to encounter yet another amorous swain? If you will be guided by me, Mr. Stanhope, you will set yourself down steady and persevering work, and you will be ruled by your father as to the place in which it will be most advisable to you to do so. And that would save him. That would save him. If Bertie Stanhope would just make a few paintings, do a few sculptures, they don't have to be all that great in Barchester, he would be back in his father's good graces, probably allowed an allowance, probably his debts paid. But anyway, where did I go off? Okay, there we go. Nothing could be more prudent, if only it were practicable. But now, if you will let me, I will tell you how it is that I will be guided by you, and why. Will you let me tell you? I really do not know what you can have to tell. No, but you cannot know. It is impossible you should. But we have been very good friends, Mrs. Bold, have we not? Yes, I think we have, said she, observing in his demeanor an earnestness very unusual for him. You were kind enough to say just now that you took an interest in me, and I was perhaps vain enough to believe you. There is no vanity in that. I do so as your sister's brother, and as my own friend also. Well, I don't deserve that you should feel so kindly towards me, said Bertie, but upon my word I am very grateful for it. And he paused a while, hardly knowing how to introduce the subject that he had in hand. And it was no wonder that he found it difficult. He had to make known to his companion the scheme that had been prepared to rob her of her wealth. He had to tell her that he had intended to marry her without loving her, or else that he loved her without intending to marry her, and he had also to bespeak from her not only his own pardon, but also that of his sister, and induce Mrs. Bold to protest in her future communion with Charlotte that an offer had been duly made to her and duly rejected. Bertie Stanhope was not prone to be very diffident of his own conversational powers, but it did seem to him that he was about to tax them almost too far. He hardly knew where to begin, and he hardly knew where he should end. By this time Eleanor was again walking on slowly by his side, not taking his arm as she had heretofore done, but listening very intently for whatever Bertie might have to say to her. I wish to be guided by you, he said, and indeed in this matter there is no one else who can set me right. Oh, there must be someone else. Well, listen to me now, Mrs. Bold, and if you can help it, pray don't be angry with me. Angry, said she. You will have cause to be. You know how very much attached to you my sister Charlotte is. Eleanor acknowledged that she did. Indeed, she is. I never knew her to love anyone so warmly on such a short acquaintance. You know also how well she loves me. Eleanor now made no answer, but she felt the blood tingle in her cheek as she gathered from what he had said the probable result of this double-barreled love on the part of Miss Stanhope. I am her only brother, Mrs. Bold, and it is not to be wondered at that she should love me. But you do not know, Charlotte. You do not know how entirely the well-being of our family hangs on her. Without her to manage for us, I do not know how we should go on from day to day. You cannot but have observed all this. Eleanor had indeed observed a good deal of this. She did not, however, now say so, but allowed him to proceed with his story. You cannot therefore be surprised that Charlotte should be most anxious to do the best for all of us. Eleanor said that she was not at all surprised. And she has had a very difficult game to play, Mrs. Bold, a very difficult game. Poor Madeline's unfortunate marriage and terrible accident, my mother's ill health, my father's absence from England, and last and worst, perhaps my own roving, idle spirit, has been almost too much for her. You cannot wonder that if among all her cares, one of the foremost is to see me settled in the world. Eleanor on this occasion expressed no acquiescence. She certainly supposed that a formal offer was to be made, and could not but think that so singular an exordium was never before made by a gentleman in a similar position. Mr. Slope had annoyed her by his excess of ardor. It was quite clear that no such danger was to be feared from Mr. Stanhope. Prudential motives alone actuated him. Not only was he about to make love because his sister told him, but he also took the precaution of explaining all this before he began. 'Twas thus, we may presume, that the matter presented itself to Mrs. Bold. When he had got so far, Bertie began poking the gravel with a little cane which he carried. He still kept moving on, but very slowly, and his companion moved slowly by his side, not inclined to assist him in the task of the performance of which appeared to be so difficult for him. Knowing how fond she is of yourself, Mrs. Bold, cannot you imagine what scheme should have occurred to her? I can imagine no better scheme, Mr. Stanhope, than the one I proposed to you just now. No, said he, somewhat lackadaisically, I suppose that would be best, but Charlotte thinks another plan might be joined with it. She wants me to marry you. 1,000 remembrances flashed across Eleanor's mind in a moment. How Charlotte had talked about and praised her brother, how she had continually contrived to throw the two of them together, how she had encouraged all manner of little intimacies, how she had with singular cordiality persisted in treating Eleanor as one of the family. All this had been done to secure her comfortable income for the benefit of one of the family. The trial of Eleanor Bold. Such a feeling as this was very bitter when it first impressed itself on a young mind. To the old, such plots and plans, such matured schemes for obtaining the goods of this world without the trouble of earning them, such long-headed attempts to convert yours into mine, are the way of life to which they are accustomed. 'Tis thus that many live, and it therefore behooves all those who are well-to-do in the world to be on their guard against those who are not. With them it is the success that disgusts, not the attempt. But Eleanor had not yet learnt to look on her money as a source of danger. She had not begun to regard herself as the fair game to be hunted down by hungry gentlemen. She had enjoyed the society of the Stanhopes. She had greatly liked the cordiality of Charlotte, and had been happy in her new friends. Now she saw the cause of all of this kindness, and her mind was opened to a new phase of human life. Miss Stanhope, she said haughtily, has been contriving for me a great deal of honor, but she might have saved herself the trouble. I am not sufficiently ambitious. Pray don't be angry with her, Mrs. Bold, or with me either. Certainly not with you, Mr. Stanhope, she said, with considerable sarcasm in her tone. Certainly not with you. And nor with her? And why, may I ask you, Mr. Stanhope, have you told me this singular story? For I may presume that I may judge by your manner of telling it that you and your sister are not exactly of one mind on the subject. No, we are not. And if so, said Mrs. Bold, who was now really angry with the unnecessary insult which she thought had been offered to her, and if so, why has it been worth your while to tell me all this? I did once think, Mrs. Bold, that you... The widow now again became entirely impassive, and would not lend the slightest assistance to her companion. I did once think that you perhaps might have been taught to regard me as more than a friend. Never, said Mrs. Bold. Never. If I've ever allowed myself to do anything to encourage such an idea, I have been very much to blame indeed. You never have, said Bertie, who really had a good-natured anxiety to make what he said as little unpleasant as possible. You never have, and I have seen for some time that I had no chance, but my sister's hopes ran higher. I have not mistaken you, Mrs. Bold, though perhaps she has. Then why have you said all this to me? What Eleanor Bold is not understanding here is, if you don't intend to propose, then why are you telling me this? It doesn't occur to her that Bertie Stanhope wants her to play act, wants her to lie on his behalf. Because I must not anger her. And will this not anger her? Upon my word, Mr. Stanhope, I do not understand the policy of your family. Oh, how I wish I was at home. And as she expressed this wish, she could restrain herself no longer, but burst out into a flood of tears. Poor Bertie was greatly moved. You shall have the carriage to yourself going home, said he, at least you and my father, for as to me, I can walk, or for the matter of that, it does not much signify what I do. He perfectly understood that part of Eleanor's grief arose from the apparent necessity of her going back to Barchester in the same carriage with her second suitor. This somewhat mollified her. Oh, Mr. Stanhope, why should you have made me so miserable? What will you have gained by telling me all this? He had not even yet explained to her the most difficult part of his proposition. He had not told her that she was to be party to this little deception, which he intended to play off upon his sister. This suggestion had still to be made, and as it was absolutely necessary, he proceeded to make it. We need not follow him through the whole of his statement. At last, and not without considerable difficulty, he gave Eleanor to understand why he had led her into confidence, seeing that he had no longer intended her the honor of a formal offer. At last he made her comprehend the part which she was destined to play in this little family comedy. But when she did understand it, she was only more angry with him than ever. More angry not only with him, but with Charlotte also. Her fair name was to be bandied about between them in different senses, and each sense false. She was to be played off by the sister against the father, and then by the brother against the sister. Her dear friend Charlotte, with all her agreeable sympathy and affection, was striving to sacrifice her for the Stanhope family welfare. And Bertie, who, as he now proclaimed himself, was over head and ears in debt, completed the compliment by owning that he did not care to have his debts paid with so great a sacrifice to himself. Then she was asked to conspire together with this unwilling suitor for the sake of making the family believe that he had, in obedience to their commands, done his best to throw himself thus away. She lifted up her face when he had finished, and looking at him with much dignity, even through her tears, she said, I regret to say it, Mr. Stanhope, but after what has passed, I believe that all intercourse between your family and myself had better cease. Well, perhaps it had, said Bertie naively. Perhaps there will be better, at any rate for a time, and then Charlotte will think you are offended by what I have done. And now I will go back to the house, if you please, because Bertie doesn't even see. He doesn't even understand which she wants nothing to do with these people anymore. They have manipulated her. The children have manipulated her in every way. He just thinks, yeah, that's good. That'll work with the plot of convincing her. Now I will go back to the house, if you please, said Eleanor. I can find my way by myself, Mr. Stanhope. After what has passed, I would rather go alone. But I must find the carriage for you, Mrs. Bold, and I must tell my father that you will return with him alone, and I must make some excuse to him for not going with you, and I must bid the servant put you down at your own house, for I suppose you will not now choose to see them again in the close. There was a truth about this, and a perspicuity in making arrangements for lessening her immediate embarrassment, which had some effect in softening Eleanor's anger. So she suffered herself to walk by his side over the now deserted lawn till they came to the drawing-room window. And the window it's an opening door. I'm sure you're all getting that from context. They're not climbing through a window, is what I'm trying to say. There was something about Bertie Stanhope which gave him, in the estimation of everyone, a different standing from that which it gave other men would occupy in similar circumstance. Angry as Eleanor was, and great as was her cause for anger, she was not half as angry with him as she would have been with anyone else. He was apparently so simple, so good-natured, so unaffected and easy to talk to, that she had already half forgiven him before he was at the drawing-room window. When they arrived there, Dr. Stanhope was sitting nearly alone with Mr. and Miss Thorne. One or two other unfortunates were there, who, for one cause or another, were still delayed in getting away, but there were every moment getting fewer in number. As soon as he had handed Eleanor over to his father, Bertie started off to the front gate in search of the carriage, and there waited leaning patiently against the front wall, comfortably smoking a cigar till it came up. When he returned to the room, Dr. Stanhope and Eleanor were alone with their hosts. "At last, Miss Thorne," said he cheerily, "I have come to relieve you. Mrs. Bold and my father are the last roses of a very delightful summer you have given us, and as desirable as Mrs. Bold's society always is, now at least you must be glad to see the last flowers plucked from the tree." Miss Thorne declared that she was delighted to have Mrs. Bold and Dr. Stanhope still with her, and Mr. Thorne would have said the same had he not been checked by a yawn which he could not suppress. "Father, will you give your arm to Mrs. Bold?" said Bertie, and so the last adieu was made, and Prebendary led out Mrs. Bold, followed by his son. "I shall come home soon after you," said he, as the two got into the carriage. "Are you not coming into the carriage?" said his father. "No, no. I have someone to see on the road, and shall walk. John, mind you drive Mrs. Bold to Mrs. Bold's house first." Eleanor, looking out of the window, saw him with his hat in his hand, bowing to her with his usual gay smile, as though nothing had happened to mark the tranquility of the day. And we get a remarkable line from Trollope. It was many a long year before she saw him again. I want to know about those years. But anyway, Dr. Stanhope hardly spoke to her on her way home, and she was safely deposited by John at her own hall door before the carriage drove into the close. And thus our heroine played the last act of the day's melodrama. So that is it for the Ullathorne breakfast party. That is it for Ullathorne Sports. All of our characters got together and quite a bit happened. And foremost among the things that happened was the trial of Eleanor Bold, where she was confronted with one person that she did not think was going to try to be her suitor, and then presented with another person she didn't think was going to try to be her suitor, and both were horrible. One grabbed her around the waist, and the other revealed a Byzantine plot among people she thought were her friends. Now, from this point on, we are moving on to chapter 43. Here, let's go to the table of contents and square this down. The thing in these Oxford editions is that the table of contents comes after all the preparing materials. You don't get it at first; you have to dig for it. It even comes after the chronology, but eventually we get to it. Barchester Towers has 53 chapters, and we are on chapter 43. And you might think that's a good distance from the end of the book, but we've already talked about Trollope's affection for falling matter. Trollope likes a nice long goodbye in his books, and I believe the register of the book changes after this point to that falling matter, where all that's left now is for him to sort of set things in order. He's largely done with his surprises. There's one surprise coming. He's largely done with them. So I firmly believe that Ullathorne Sports, the collection of chapters called that, is the climax of this book. But we still have a lot of plot threads just dangling there, and they're all going to be wonderfully worked out. Trollope is wonderful at this part of his book. So we're now heading into the last 10 chapters of this book, which we will start next time. So I'm going to stop this and try to comfort my desperate little choking dog. I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.